The story of the Mark 14 torpedo during World War II is one of the most shocking examples of how advanced military technology can fail when it matters most. At the beginning of the war, the United States Navy had immense confidence in this weapon. It was considered the backbone of submarine warfare, designed to silently strike enemy ships and cripple supply lines deep in hostile waters. Engineers had spent years developing it, and on paper, it looked nearly perfect. It featured a powerful warhead, a sophisticated depth control system, and a revolutionary magnetic exploder that would detonate beneath a ship rather than on impact, theoretically causing catastrophic structural damage. However, once submarines began using it in real combat situations, a very different reality emerged. Commanders started noticing something was terribly wrong. Torpedoes that should have hit their targets were missing entirely. Others would hit but fail to explode, while some detonated too early, giving away the submarine's position and putting the crew in danger. Reports from the field suggested a staggering failure rate. Around 11 out of 13 torpedoes were ineffective. This wasn't just a minor technical issue, it was a devastating flaw that directly impacted the outcome of critical missions. Submarine crews, who risked their lives on every patrol, were left confused and frustrated. They executed their attacks perfectly, calculated angles and distances with precision, and still watched as their weapons failed them. The consequences were severe. Enemy ships escaped unharmed, supply lines remained intact, and opportunities to weaken opposing forces were lost. Even worse, these failures often exposed submarines to counterattacks, increasing the danger for American sailors. Despite these alarming patterns, higher command initially refused to believe that the problem was with the torpedo itself. Instead, blame was often placed on the submarine crews, suggesting poor aim or incorrect tactics. This created tension between those on the front lines and those making decisions from afar. The Mark 14 torpedo, once seen as a symbol of technological superiority, quickly became a source of doubt and frustration. Its failures highlighted a deeper issue within the military system, an unwillingness to question assumptions and acknowledge flaws in critical equipment. As the war intensified, it became increasingly clear that this problem could not be ignored, but valuable time had already been lost. One of the most critical and controversial components of the Mark 14 torpedo was its magnetic exploder, a device intended to revolutionize naval warfare. Unlike traditional torpedoes that detonated upon direct contact with a ship's hull, this system was designed to sense the magnetic field of a vessel and explode beneath it. The idea was simple yet powerful. A blast under the keel would create a pressure wave strong enough to snap the ship in half, causing far more damage than a side explosion ever could. In theory, this innovation gave the United States Navy a significant advantage. However, in practice, it became one of the torpedo's greatest weaknesses. The magnetic exploder was extremely sensitive to environmental conditions, and it struggled to function correctly in the varying magnetic fields found across different regions of the ocean. Changes in latitude, water composition, and even the structure of enemy ships affected its performance. As a result, the torpedo often detonated too early, before reaching its target, or failed to detonate at all. Submarine commanders repeatedly reported these issues, describing scenarios where perfectly executed attacks resulted in no damage. They would position their submarines with precision, fire their torpedoes, and wait for the expected explosion, only to be met with silence. In some cases, premature detonations alerted enemy ships, allowing them to evade further attacks and launch countermeasures. Despite mounting evidence, officials responsible for the torpedo's design were reluctant to accept these flaws. Admitting the problem would have meant acknowledging serious errors in development and testing, which could damage reputations and careers. Instead, many reports were dismissed or downplayed. This resistance delayed necessary improvements and prolonged the suffering of those relying on the weapon. The magnetic exploder, once hailed as a groundbreaking advancement, became a symbol of overconfidence and poor testing. It demonstrated how a single faulty component could undermine an entire system, no matter how advanced it appeared. Eventually, after persistent complaints and undeniable proof from the field, the decision was made to disable the magnetic feature altogether. This marked a turning point, but it also raised a troubling question: how many opportunities had been lost before this change was finally made? Another major issue that plagued the Mark 14 torpedo was its faulty depth control system, a problem that proved just as damaging as the magnetic exploder. Submarine warfare relies heavily on precision, and even small errors can mean the difference between success and failure. Crews carefully calculated the depth at which their torpedoes should travel, aiming to strike the most vulnerable part of an enemy ship. However, the Mark 14 consistently failed to maintain its set depth. Instead of traveling at the programmed level, it often ran significantly deeper. For example, a torpedo set to run at 10 feet might actually travel at 15 or even 20 feet. This meant that instead of hitting the hull of a ship, it would pass harmlessly beneath it. At first, many commanders believed they had miscalculated their shots. The idea that such an advanced piece of equipment could be so fundamentally flawed seemed unlikely. However, as similar reports came in from multiple submarines, a pattern began to emerge. Crews started conducting their own unofficial tests, firing torpedoes under controlled conditions to observe their behavior. These experiments confirmed their suspicions: the depth settings were inaccurate. This discovery was both a relief and a frustration. On one hand, it proved that the crews were not at fault. On the other hand, it highlighted a serious design flaw that should have been identified long before the torpedo was deployed in combat. The problem was traced back to faulty calibration during testing, where conditions did not accurately reflect real-world scenarios. Despite this evidence, it took time for the issue to be officially acknowledged and corrected. During this period, countless torpedoes continued to miss their targets, wasting valuable resources and opportunities. The depth control failure underscored the importance of realistic testing and the dangers of relying too heavily on theoretical performance. It also revealed a disconnect between those who designed the weapon and those who used it in the field. For submarine crews, every failed attack was a reminder that their success depended not only on skill and courage but also on the reliability of their equipment. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the Mark 14 torpedo crisis was not the technical failures themselves, but the response of the military leadership. In any large organization, especially during wartime, admitting mistakes can be difficult. However, in this case, the reluctance to acknowledge the problem had serious consequences. Before the war, testing of the torpedo had been limited and often unrealistic. Live warheads were rarely used, and many tests were conducted under controlled conditions that did not accurately simulate combat. This approach was partly driven by cost-saving measures, as torpedoes were expensive to produce. As a result, critical flaws went unnoticed. When the war began and reports of failures started to surface, officials initially dismissed them. Submarine commanders were often blamed for poor performance, with suggestions that they lacked proper training or made errors in judgment. This created a sense of frustration and distrust among those on the front lines. They knew something was wrong, but their concerns were not being taken seriously. Over time, the volume of reports became impossible to ignore. Detailed accounts, supported by data and first-hand observations, painted a clear picture of widespread failure. Some commanders went as far as conducting their own investigations, gathering evidence to support their claims. This persistence eventually forced higher command to take notice. However, the delay in addressing the issue meant that valuable time had been lost. Enemy forces continued to operate with less resistance than expected, and opportunities to disrupt their operations were missed. The Mark 14 torpedo crisis became a case study in the dangers of bureaucratic inertia and the importance of listening to those with direct experience. It showed that even in highly structured organizations, effective communication and a willingness to adapt are essential. Without these qualities, even the most advanced technology can become a liability rather than an asset. By mid-1943, the situation had reached a turning point. The evidence was overwhelming, and the pressure from submarine commanders could no longer be ignored. The United States Navy finally took decisive action to address the problems with the Mark 14 torpedo. The magnetic exploder was disabled, eliminating one of the most unreliable components. The depth control system was recalibrated to ensure accurate performance, and the contact exploder was redesigned to improve its reliability. These changes marked a significant improvement in the torpedo's effectiveness. Almost immediately, submarine crews began to see better results. Attacks that would have previously failed now succeeded, and enemy ships were destroyed with increasing frequency. This transformation had a major impact on the war effort, particularly in the Pacific theater, where submarines played a crucial role in disrupting enemy supply lines. The success of these operations demonstrated the importance of addressing technical issues promptly and thoroughly. It also highlighted the resilience and determination of the crews who continued to fight despite the challenges they faced. The story of the Mark 14 torpedo serves as a powerful lesson in military history. It shows that innovation alone is not enough. Technology must be tested, refined, and proven under real-world conditions. It also emphasizes the importance of accountability and the need to listen to those on the front lines. In the end, the torpedo that once symbolized failure became a key factor in achieving success. However, the lessons learned from its early failures remain relevant to this day, reminding us that even the most advanced systems are only as reliable as the processes used to develop and evaluate them.